So today's topic is preparing for graduate school interviews, whether they're virtual or in person. This is a topic that I have been lecturing on for a long time. One of my favorite webinars or workshops to deliver, because it's like this, the beginning of this process that is so important for the next step in your educational path. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Milgram, and I direct the Office of Intramural Training and Education at NIH. I have directed the admissions process here at NIH for the Graduate Partnerships Program, and also in my earlier position at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of an admissions officer and try to give you some insider information about the process. Please put your questions in the Q&A. That will give us the best chance of addressing all of them and making sure that your questions get answered. We've done this a lot. We've asked what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word interview. This happens to actually be with a group of postbacks, and the Wordle was generated with about 130 or 150 people, just about the size today. And you can see that the word stress is the biggest word. Some other maybe sort of fun words like shopping. I think hopefully somewhere in there is the word opportunity. But if you look, there's a whole lot: horror, scary, panic, right? Pressure, overwhelm, intimidation. My job today is to help us look at the interview process from a more realistic lens. Yes, it is a stressful time, right? You're being evaluated, but it's also a time of opportunity, a time for you to find the right graduate program, to get to know people in your new community. So my hope is at the end of the talk today, you will see the stress of the situation and put it in perspective. You will see the opportunity of the situation and sort of embrace it. One of the key takeaways about the interview season every year, but especially these last 2 years as we've navigated the COVID pandemic, is that we really need to put our energy into things we can control. We really can't control travel policies, even though we wish to control them. Right? I think everybody agrees that pre-pandemic in-person interviews were the way to go. You got to visit, you got to see people. It felt so much more authentic. You got to see the place. So I know all of you wish to control the outcome of all of this. But unfortunately, we are in this period of flux and uncertainty. Things are most certainly improving in the US, but there is a surge happening in Europe. Often we follow a few weeks later behind what happens there. We still have 75,000 COVID cases a day. This is still a serious situation. And so you might not be able to control, you might not be able to choose whether to go in person or not. We certainly have very little control over all of this. And so today we're going to focus on what we can control, which is preparing for any outcome. But I want to do that by first acknowledging how stressful this uncertainty is. And so this comes from a website from a university. There are many versions like this across the web. I just Googled about a half a dozen schools and picked one. Due to the uncertainty surrounding COVID-19, program directors and administrators are working to develop plans that may include both virtual and on-site activities, right? Talk about uncertainty. We don't know yet. If they occur, any on-site activities would be optional, and should an applicant choose not to visit campus in person, that will not affect the admissions decision. So we know a lot about how our brain processes uncertainty, how it hears information and often catastrophizes. where our stories can get very distorted. We talk a lot about that in the Resilient Scientist series as part of our well-being program. I can imagine that people read this and say, really, do they mean that? What if it doesn't go as well? What if technology fails? And they say, oh, should have come in person, right? So let's acknowledge the stress of all of this. Uncertainty is hard for us as humans to deal with. This is a very high stakes process. We're all hoping for the best, but we don't know whether there will be in-person or virtual interviews. We don't know if there will be chances for follow-up visits to campus, right? We're sitting in a period of uncertainty. Transitions are stressful. The graduate school application process is stressful. So let's just start by acknowledging that you feel stressed. And I want to say that feeling stressed makes sense. It's okay for now. My hope is that we will bring this stress level down over time. So first and foremost, this is the appropriate response. High stakes, really important. You want to do your best. Stress is also a potentially helpful one, right? There's good stress, right? There's distress that's outside of our ability to cope, but there's also good stress or eustress. This stress could be helpful if we put our comforts and fears into perspective and we use this stress as a warning sign, as a data point to develop a strategy and to practice. If we harness this stress to focus our energy, we're going to process that stress, it's going to go down, and we're going to be prepared. So today, to help you do that, and to help you switch your view of interviews from stress only to opportunity, I'm going to give you an insider view of the process. I am going to do my best to answer as many questions as possible. I'm going to remind you of resources that are very, very helpful and hopefully give you a really nice way forward. So I want to start by talking about calming your stress in advance, not the day of or the week of the interview. And I have 2 slides because we don't know who's going to have virtual interviews and who's going to have in-person interviews. So my first slide in terms of calming your stress is to encourage you to be proactive and think through all elements of the virtual format in advance. You want to know where your quiet and professional space is, where you're going to do your interviews. You want to make sure there's not a lot of distractions. You want to make sure that there's high quality Wi-Fi. It is easier this year to be on campus, whether you're at NIH or at another institution. Talk to someone about a really quiet, helpful space. Your PI might be able to help. Your program director might be able to help. If you're at NIH, reach out to us. If you can't find a space, we will most certainly help. You want to take care of any required software downloads in advance or update to the latest version. You want everything tested in advance. You want to think about the lighting, the background, and the height of your computer so that you don't look at yourself the day of the interview and say, oh no, too dark, or oh, this doesn't look good at all. Meeting people across a virtual platform is something we do a lot now. And I think that I want you to consider doing that via your virtual handshake, how you lean in to the computer and make it clear how happy you are to be there. I find that exaggerating a little bit your hand motions helps. You don't want them to be too distracting, but to reach out and say, I'm so glad to be here. You also want to practice asking and answering interview questions online. You know, I think in Zoom over the last year, some individuals have gotten into the habit of absorbing information. I attend a webinar and I listen. I might put something into the chat, but for the most part, it is a one direction event. But here it's going to be a back and forth, and you're going to want to unmute yourself and speak up. I also think you might want to practice doing a social activity or 2 on Zoom so you can practice speaking up and stepping down and engaging in small groups. Because if the interviews are via Zoom, you'll meet with students via Zoom, you might meet with faculty via Zoom. And there is a certain awkwardness to who speaks, how do we make this work? You don't want to be experiencing that awkwardness in the moment. You want to be experiencing it in advance so that you have your strategies. You want to have your notepads, snacks, water, all of that sorted out and ready in advance, right? I have my water bottle here, and I note that I didn't pause for a moment and fill it. That's not what you want to happen when you're actually at the interview. So you want it all ready. And then finally, there's less stress about clothing via Zoom interviews since we only see a portion, but still, it's amazing to me how stressful what to wear can be. I did a really important event by Zoom last March. I think I changed 3 times, and I wished I had put things on the day before, made sure I was happy with it. So you want to pick out your clothing in advance. Do not do the ha-ha funny interview shirt on top and pajamas on the bottom, or a pair of shorts on the bottom. If you get up and somebody sees that, it's just an awkward moment. You also don't need to be as formal as you might need to be in person, but you want to make sure that everything looks professional. Now, you might have a combination of virtual and in-person interviews, or all in person. So I want to talk about calming your stress around in-person interviews in advance. That starts with a moment or many moments of reflection on your COVID safety plans while you travel and at the interview, what you are specifically comfortable with, right? How you want to handle anything that maybe crosses your boundaries of COVID safety. So you want to think about all of that in advance. You want to work with the school to arrange your travel and lodging, and you should be open about your specific needs. You know, I was thinking a lot about this vis-a-vis NIH interviews and thinking, well, usually people have roommates. Would that be a very good idea right now? Right. And so you need to think that through. Some schools might decide it's a good idea. Some schools might decide it's not a good idea. But the real question is, what do you decide? And you need to practice being open and discussing your needs. Even though you will be in person, social distancing has most definitely changed the way we interact. I don't think I have experienced very many handshakes, and normally we talk about handshakes on introductions, and now we're going to do that likely without an actual handshake. So even though it's in person, a virtual handshake. You're also going to be farther apart, right? You might have masks on. So you want to make sure all of that is comfortable. I think that a lot of us are out of practice with social activities in person. We've been engaging with a much smaller sphere in our social circle. So it might be a good idea to make sure you're not rusty in that regard. If there is a chance for you to engage in a small group activity that's in person, depends on your institution, depends on where you are. If you can, I think it would be a good idea. Gives you a chance to sort of get over the issues around making sure you feel safe, talking about your boundaries vis-a-vis COVID. Same thing, notebook, snacks, water, set up in advance, have it with you, right? You need to be prepared. These are long days. Having a water bottle, bringing some nice healthy snacks is a good idea. And then finally, clothing is an issue in person as well. Look at the agenda and select appropriate clothing. More and less formal, depending on what's happening. For a social activity, a pair of jeans and a informal sweater is appropriate. For an interview, business casual is a better choice. If it's an MD, PhD interview and there's interviews, something more than business casual is appropriate, right? So you want to think about the agenda, the program, right? The specific activities in the program, and make sure you have the right clothing. So we want to talk a little bit more about calming your stress in advance. And I want to focus now on you turning inward and looking at how you're taking care of yourself. This will be a stressful time. And so you want to be working on your sort of well-being practice and your resilience now. So look at your behaviors around food and sleep. Are you eating healthy? Are you getting sleep? Use of stimulants and depressants, right? We sometimes deal with stress in unhealthy ways, right? And you don't want to go into the interview from a place of unsettledness or a place of stress. Exercise is such a positive part of our wellness strategies. That can mean different things to different people, from gentle walking to yoga to doing CrossFit and really high intensity exercise. Whatever is right for you, you want to get moving now. The data are so clear about how this can help. Mindfulness and other ways to calm your nerves in the moment are a good thing to think about. If you're at NIH, you can join some of our drop-in meditation groups, learn how to calm yourself in the moment. If you're not at NIH and don't have access to that, reach out to us and we'll give you a link to one of our activities. A lot of students deal with negative self-talk and imposter fears. Those two things feed into unhelpful or uncomfortable emotions. They synergize all together, leading to self-sabotaging behavior. And if you find yourself telling a lot of negative stories about the interview process, telling yourself you don't really belong, you're not ready, everybody else is going to be doing better than you, it's time to look at that and deal with it now. You can watch the part of our Resilient Scientist series on imposter fears and cognitive distortions online. You can take a look at the OITE Wellness and Resilience page for other activities to help with that. It is pretty common that these pop up at interview season. And as we've talked about many times, there are real strategies for dealing with them, talking back to them, using mindfulness to help you pause. Finally, just sit and say, are there other things that might be getting in the way? These things that I listed or something else. And if there are things that you worry will get in the way of your success, talk to somebody about them now. If you are at a university, you can find someone who leads your program, a mentor who really supports you, someone in student health in the behavioral health unit here at NIH, people within your lab, your branch, OITE, the OITE Wellness Program, the Employee Assistance Program. There are lots of resources. The thing is to be proactive. The more proactive you are, the more prepared you will be, and the less stressed you will be. Another thing that I would encourage you to consider is to talk with your PI and mentors. Talk with them about the science you're doing, because at the interviews, you're going to talk about science a lot. You want to talk to them about other science you wrote about in your application. If you wrote about a summer project long ago, it's fair game for someone to say, tell me about that, not about what you're doing right now. So you want to practice telling people about that. You also will decrease your stress if you talk with your PI and your daily supervisors about time off for interviews. You don't want to be working intensely to juggle work or school together with interviews. You want an advanced discussion about how to do that effectively. If you are really stressed about doing that, seek guidance from someone you trust in advance of that discussion. And again, if you're here at NIH, people in your training office, people in the OITE are here to support you in that. One last thing that you can do to calm your stress in advance is be very thoughtful as you accept invitations to interview, right? When possible, you should schedule interviews so you have some time in between to collect yourself, attend to work, take care of life, etc. If traveling, again, go back to your comforts and discomforts. with COVID safety and general travel, and make sure that you schedule with that in mind. That might mean clustering interviews together to minimize travel, right? I'm heading to the Midwest. Let me try to do 3 interviews close together, right? That might mean scheduling interviews farther apart than you might have in pre-COVID time, so that you can come home, make sure you feel good, take care of things before you head out again. I can't really say it's going to depend on your schedule. It's going to depend on you. But I know that thinking this through can help a lot. That's tied to talking with your PI, because if you're going to fly out to the West Coast, or, and be, so there's an interview day and a day in between and more interviews, right? It's going to be a longer time away. And so it is important to have discussions about that. And then finally, resilience is people plus process plus preparation, which we've been talking about. The process is using resources, every support you have in getting ready. That can be career counselors, that's people within your research group, career counselors, wellness advisors, mentors, prior webinars on stress management and resilience, everything available to you to be prepared, to focus not only on the science, but also your stress management. So those are the 5 things you want to keep in mind, and that's in advance. Now, the day of, you want to continue to implement all of these strategies, working on having good sleep hygiene, eating healthy meals. You want to get up early the day of, take a walk, work out, journal, meditate, do yoga, whatever makes you feel really good about yourself. I think it's really helpful on stressful days to reach out to a supporter for a kind word. I actually think it's good to start with that and to be intentional and tell someone, I could use a really positive text from you in the morning. And then if something doesn't go well in the moment, you can reach out and say, hey, had a stressful moment. I could really use a kind word. Sometimes it's what, I've been working at home now for a long time, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about that, and would love to get back to work. But one thing I've noticed, because I'm home and my wife is here as well, is sometimes when I have a really difficult moment, I just go upstairs and say, oh, really rough, less than shining moment, or a rough meeting, or, oh, I was on the receiving end of some really intense jackling input, and just having somebody outside work express a few sentences of support, or even just a few words of support, goes a long way. So I've had a chance to experience that over the pandemic. I used to suggest it, just thinking it was a good idea, but I've come to really appreciate for myself. One of the key things we do to calm stress in the moment is a few really deep breaths. It really slows us down, and it gives us a chance to refocus when we need to. On the OITE website is a talk in the mental health series on dealing with anxiety. And in that talk, they point out there is anxiety that can be, helpful, and anxiety that is disproportionate to the event or lasts very, very long, that can be very unhelpful. And at the end of that talk, they talk about a variety of deep breathing techniques. A lot of things are out of your control. If you get bumped off of Zoom, if because of COVID restrictions, last minute, a meeting that was going to be in person turns out that you're sitting on a computer in the school talking with somebody, a lot of things are out of your control. And I think it's going to be really important to use some deep breaths to slow down your racing thoughts. I also want to remind you that everyone else is nervous too. Maybe you don't see their nervousness. You certainly can't feel their nervousness, but you assume you're the only one. You are not. And then finally, make sure the day of that you are talking kindly back to any negative thoughts that come up. You might have to say, there was a less than shining moment in that interview. However, parts of it went well, and I still need to keep going, right? So you want to be able to talk kindly. I think that that's a really, really key skill for these interviews. So that's a lot on stress management, because I actually think it's a big part of success. All right. So I know a lot of people just, oh, get to the important part. Actually, that was very important, and I hope you stick with it and think about it. So what will the interview process be like? There are lots of unknowns this year. We're going to have to pause and breathe into them and wait for information. Programs will be updating often, I'm sure. You want to carefully read program emails. They will send tip sheets and FAQs to help you with virtual components. They will be very, very open about COVID safety. Everyone wants this to be a positive process. You are stressed about this, and so are schools. I will be honest and say we never imagined that we would be contemplating a second year of virtual interviews. We are just as frustrated and struggling and worried about that as you are. So everyone is in this together, trying to give as clear information as possible. Regardless of whether things are virtual or in person, there is likely to be some type of campus tour by video. Obviously, if it's virtual, hopefully you'll get to see these campuses. Even if the interview is virtual, they might, as things get better, be able to welcome you to campus. So one part will be seeing campus. You will have opportunities to interact with current students. You will have interviews with faculty and program administrators. And there are often panels of students talking about things, right? Sharing their experience. The actual interviews are often a series of short one-on-one meetings, but sometimes there are group meetings, you with several interviewers, or you and several other people applying together with an interviewer. There, the challenge is to both speak up and allow others to speak up. If it's a group interview of you with multiple PIs, the challenge is sort of sorting through. Somebody asks a question, answering them, it jumps to somebody else. How do you sort of manage all of those transitions? A lot of them will be short one-on-one meetings, though. So just so you have a sense of what to expect. In terms of setting up the interview, you are likely to get phone calls or emails to invite you. You want to respond promptly and professionally. Even if you can't say yet whether you can come, you're waiting to hear from another school, you want to respond back and say, thank you for this invitation. Can I have a week to let you know? Or it might say you have until X date. Rather than waiting till that date, respond back and say, thank you for the invitation. I will be back in touch soon. Then they know they made contact with you. You want to read all of the instructions carefully before you call with logistical questions. To call with questions that were addressed in the FAQs just doesn't put your best foot forward. So pause, read everything carefully, highlight important information, make some notes, then call if you have logistical questions. You should be as accommodating as possible regarding dates that they offer you for interviews, but you need to be realistic regarding your schedule. You can't be multiple places at one time, even though it feels like you can because you're just sitting on Zoom. If they're virtual, it's just too much stress. And as I said already, it's okay to ask for time to get back to them. When you are setting up your interview, make sure you understand the structure of the interview and when you need to be available. Maybe there's something in the evening and they really would like you to be there. So you don't want to schedule something else, right? As you learn all of this information, make sure that your PI, the people who are your daily supervisors, know about it. And then follow directions. If they say, we will be taking care of airline tickets, send us times and the closest airport, do that. If they say, buy your own ticket, send us the receipt, do that. But it's really important to follow directions. It's also really important to follow directions if they are virtual, because people are using all kinds of platforms. The other day I gave a talk and I didn't pay attention in advance, and I showed up 5 minutes before and I didn't have my settings correct. So I couldn't share my screen. You don't want those kinds of things to happen. If they say, here's the software, we're gonna do a check 2 days before, follow directions and do that. The most important thing that I can say to you beyond start looking at your stress management and your wellness is this: the program is interviewing you. That is absolutely true. But you are also interviewing the program. You need to make a decision about what's right for you. And that means that you are there gathering data as well. Don't get lost in your primary role is to convince them. You have two jobs here. First and foremost, to do a good job on interviewing, but a very close second to gather the information you need to make a good decision. Also, don't go in there arrogant and assume that you're going to get an offer, so you're just there interviewing, because nobody really likes arrogant individuals, and certainly arrogant graduate students don't take advice very, very well. So don't go in with the attitude that the only thing that matters is them convincing you. It is both. You are trying to engage with them so they see the value in inviting you to their program, and you are interviewing them so you can make sure it's a good fit. Two goals. In preparation in advance, reread your application, everything you wrote, reread material about the school and program. You know, if they have a set curriculum, you're going to want to ask about it. But if you don't remember that, you won't. If they have an office of professional development, if they have a strong well-being program, you want to know about those things. If they have teaching requirements, you want to ask about them. So reread your application material and reread material about them. Learn about the work of faculty you're going to meet with, read some of their papers, doesn't have to be dozens of their papers. And if their papers are far outside your field, at a minimum, read the research description on their website. Sometimes you interview with someone way outside your field, and that's because they are on the admissions committee, or they couldn't find anyone else, and this is a really strong advocate for graduate education, and that's how your slot got filled. So if you should try to read some of their most recent science papers. You also, if that becomes overwhelming, the honest truth is 5 or 6 interviews, 5 or 6 people at each, like do the math. That's really asking a lot. So at a minimum, read the research descriptions. If you are applying for clinical psychology or computer science programs that require you to match with one person in advance, then obviously you want to read in great depth, because you will be discussing specific projects you might want to work on. I talked already about greeting people. Beyond just saying, hi, nice to meet you, either via Zoom or some other platform or in person in these times of COVID, you also want to practice your short introduction to me. What are you going to say in that first 2 sentences to meet someone, right? Hi, I am so-and-so. I am currently an NIH postbac working on, right? What is it that you're going to say? I'm currently an undergraduate senior majoring in. I'm working in a lab now looking at. Just a short introduction. Some people like to call that an elevator pitch. I just like to call it the introduction to me talk. Now, beyond that general introduction, you are going to need to talk about your research. And so you're going to want to practice that with people who really know your field, so they can ask you hard questions and make sure that you can dive deep and answer them, but also people outside your field, so that you practice talking about your science to smart non-experts. When I interview graduate students, sometimes I know nothing about what they do, right? And so I rely on them to give me an introduction that I can understand. You also want to practice answering common interview questions. I'm going to give you a list of them to think about. You want to prepare your questions in advance. What do you need to know? And I already talked about interview space and sorting out what you're going to wear. I repeat them multiple times because they are really stressful things for students. Your goal is to present yourself in a positive light with enthusiasm, but also with honesty. We are not looking for perfection. Nobody on the admissions committee is perfect. We're looking for an honest assessment of you. One presented in a positive way and an enthusiastic way, not one presented from this internal jackal, I'm lacking this, I'm bad at that, I struggled with this, but an honest assessment from a positive view. You want to show clearly that you understand your research and a little bit about the field you're entering. You want to be able to describe your current interests, knowing that they could evolve, and sometimes they evolve very dramatically. I went to graduate school because I wanted to study traumatic brain injury or stroke in animal models, and I ended up studying the biosynthesis of pancreatic islet hormones in an in vitro cell culture system. My interest changed dramatically when I got into biochemistry. So you want to talk about your interests in a firm way, but not a rigid way. And if you are really interested in multiple things, you want to be able to talk about that and show that you understand sort of how things are interrelated, connected, etc. Another goal is to show that you understand what a career in your field entails. Some knowledge about career outcomes in general is helpful. There's this notion that you have to want to be a PI to go to graduate school. Quality programs have worked hard to expand their discussion of diversity of career outcomes. And it is important for you to be able to discuss careers within the field. If you want to do industry in the long term and no one at that school is enthusiastic about industry, it's going to be really hard to be happy there. So you want to be able to talk about your career interests and show some sophistication. Some of you might have a bump in your past, some poor grades, a semester you dropped out for some reason. You might have started in one lab and left it for whatever reason. And you want to be ready to explain those bumps without sharing too much information, without saying anything negative about others, without making excuses. I think it's really important to talk about those one-on-one with a mentor. I'm sure there'll be some questions and I'll try to address them when you ask, when we do the Q&A. But in general, you'll want to think that through. You have some other goals, and they are looking at this from the other way to find out if the research being done excites you, to learn details of the program, students, faculty, and community. Does this feel like a place where you will shine? Will you be seen, valued, and heard for who you are? Can you bring all of your wonderful identities to work and school every day, right? Is this a place where you can be you? And then you want to figure out if it's the right school and life for you. Sometimes we visit a place and we say, wow, wonderful school, but can't live here. I'm surprised sometimes how strong of a response I have to place. Like, I just can't live here. I know it might be great, but there's got to be another great place in a place that feels more authentic and better for me. So you got a lot of goals. I appreciate that figuring out if this is the right school and life for you is much harder virtually. What I can say is many of our postbacks who went through this last year shared that it was easier than they thought to really evaluate things. Some were able to figure out ways to visit a limited number of schools after they had offers, but some made the decision without visiting. I am starting to get those trickle-in meetings from people who left saying, hey, Sharon, I want to update you on how things are going. And I have to say that people are happy and settling in. I'm sure not everyone, right? It is hard to make a decision virtually. But the honest truth is sometimes people made the wrong decision even when they visited because of pressure, because they listened to input of others, etc. All right, so those are your goals. So 2 things, preparation pays off and first impressions form quickly and are very hard to change. We form first impressions in a variety of ways, from your dress, from your nonverbal communications, and from your verbal communications. Even virtually, right, that you are really engaged in the computer screen, you don't have your phone here on the side, you know, you're really engaged, your posture, eye contact, we pay attention to all of that. In person, it's easier sometimes to see some nervous mannerisms and gestures. You know, you are who you are, and you will be nervous. So that's okay. But you want to be aware of how you come across and do your best to have strategies for really using effective nonverbal communication. In terms of your verbal communication, we're watching for your ability to organize and express ideas. We get some sense of confidence from how you communicate your voice and tone. And we're also listening for your ability to hear our question and answer our question, right? So there's both listening and sharing in all of this. At group activities, some more things to remember. It is not all about you. So don't dominate the discussion. This is not a place where you have to win wittiest, most energetic person there. It's a place where you have to connect authentically with people, show respect to others, right? Show that you are both able to step up and step back. Some other things, you're trying to connect professionally and personally within professional boundaries. So what I mean about that is you might share some things about hobbies. You might share some things, you know, about your personal life, but you want to keep appropriate boundaries. Ask yourself, why am I sharing this? And if you don't have an answer why, then you might have shared too much. All right. So you're trying to connect about science, but also life, because you are going to go there and be a graduate student, and your life is coming with your science. Even social activities are part of the interview. If it's in person, don't hang back on your phone. If it's virtual, don't have your email or something else open behind the scenes. Go all in. Really important to have questions when asked. And that's in every way. During individual meetings with faculty, you need some questions about the science they talked with you about, but you might also consider asking questions about the program, about what their view of graduate students, about their engagement in courses, etc. You might ask both faculty and students at this point, how has the community dealt with COVID? What positive things came out of this for everybody getting together and supporting each other? You have to have questions during talks and at posters. You know, if there is virtual, put something in the chat, right? At the end, if they say, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, do that. It is such a way to shine. It is very appropriate to ask about diversity and inclusion, wellness support, efforts to improve mentoring, affinity groups for students of color, LGBTQ students, support for trainees that have chronic illness and a variety of disabilities. It's appropriate to ask about all of that. It is also your choice to ask or not ask, right? Some people feel if you ask too much in advance, people are reading into what you ask, and you do what feels comfortable. That said, none of us can go somewhere for 5 or 6 years and feel unsupported. And so you do want to know what's being done to support graduate students. Some of you who've heard me talk in other venues have heard me share that there's data out there pre-pandemic of a 6-fold higher rate of anxiety and depression in PhD graduate students in the biomedical sciences. And actually, the Council of Graduate Schools shows data now that suggests this extends to graduate students in other in the humanities and social sciences. right? You want to be at a place that's proactively working on that, that cares about those data, that says it is our responsibility to help. It is appropriate to ask about social life and non-school activities. Quite frankly, those are protective for mental health when we have outlets to socialize, when we have a strong sense of support. So it is very appropriate to ask about them. You should balance those questions by more academic questions, not numbers wise. I mean, you ask social life questions and academic questions. And in general, if you're worried about this, just lead with the academic ones. I personally think things have changed. COVID has accelerated that change. I think it is very appropriate to ask about diversity, inclusion, wellness support. What happens when a mentoring environment is unhealthy? What do people do outside of school to support each other? What student groups and clubs are available? Not only do I think these are appropriate questions, I think these are critical questions. And I think COVID has accelerated your ability to ask them. But I acknowledge that you want to portray yourself as someone thinking about science as well. So just mix them. And then I think you will feel more comfortable. In terms of interviewing successfully, I have a few things to say. One is that you need to show you understand both the big picture and the details of your research. Some of you come at problems from big picture and you forget to make sure you know all the details. Some of you like to come at a problem from the details and then look at the big picture. You have to be able to do both. To some degree, you need to talk about what you're doing now, but you might also have to talk about less recent projects. And I pointed that out earlier, just keep that in mind. You want to sort of titrate your answer to the person you're talking to. If you're talking to an expert, you don't need to give as much basic background. If you're talking to a non-expert, you do. And so you want to practice doing that. I think you should take a moment, all of you, to think about how COVID has impacted your progress. Some of you were out of lab for shorter periods of times than others. Some of you had to pivot quickly to do projects as a result of the pandemic. You need to be clear about how COVID has impacted your progress. If you are in a negative space about all of that, you really want to practice in advance because you don't want to bring that negativity into the interview. Something that happens on the one extreme, we don't practice enough and then we tend to ramble. On the other extreme, we practice too much and it's all comes off sounding really rehearsed. You don't want either of those. So don't ramble, but don't be so terse that you don't share anything, right? You want to limit the length of your response, pause. If they ask another question, move on. If it stays quiet for a while, say, would you like me to elaborate more, right? So you want to be careful not to ramble. But you also want to be careful not to give so little that people get a feeling you don't understand things. Where possible, use examples to show rather than just tell. If you're talking about developing your communication skills as a postbac, you want to talk about where you've presented and what you've learned from that. And then one last thing, I always get questions, should I bring a PowerPoint, a printout of my poster? I would not plan on using props because either you might be virtual and not able to share your screen, or you might be sitting pretty far from the interviewer given COVID safety issues. If a school says you're going to give a 3-minute talk or you have one slide and you're going to give a talk, then obviously they want you to bring that. So ignore that piece of advice if the school says, please bring 2 data slides or please prepare a 3-minute talk. You want to ask good questions about science and good questions about the program. You want to ask questions about student and faculty research, right? You want to be really good about using your questions to show what's important for you. You should use your questions, answers, and interactions to show that you are enthusiastic, realistic, and hardworking. I know that some individuals have had negative experiences in previous labs. This is not the time to go into depth. I know that research can have its really frustrating moments. To acknowledge that honestly, here's what hasn't worked and how I've dealt with it. That's the right way. To get really caught in why it didn't work and what, all the negative space about it, not the way to connect. If you have some poor grades, just gracefully accept responsibility. It's interesting. Some schools don't even share your grades. Like, I think people should interview without seeing grades. They lead to assumed constraints. We look at somebody's GPA, we lose context. Like, maybe they had to work full time, right? Maybe they really took the hardest classes they could to stretch. And we don't have that context. We see their grade, we make a first impression, and we can't let go of it. So some people won't even know your grades, right? Some people might. Somebody might say, why'd you get that C in chemistry? Just answer. You're not the only person who got a C in chemistry. There are lots of things that could have happened, right? I took a lot of classes. I took it early and my study skills were not up to par, right? If there's a whole series of poor grades, you want to talk with a mentor about how to deal with this. But individual one-off issues, you just want to practice. And then the last thing about interviewing successfully goes back to my talk about nervousness and stress, right? So you want to have your strategies: deep breaths, healthy snacks, water, a mantra, right? Maybe, the other day I was talking to somebody, a trainee who was going to do something hard, and she paused for a moment and she said, I've done hard things before, right? That's a beautiful example of a mantra. I've had uncomfortable moments before. Interviews are hard. Ouch, that was a tough moment. Some of them have been great moments. Whatever you need. Also, use your breaks wisely. Do not get on your phone and scan Instagram and Twitter. Get outside, stretch, make sure that you take care of your needs. Use your time wisely, whether these are in-person interviews or virtual interviews. I know we have this tendency to get right on our phones. It's like a pacifier almost. You might need to get on your phone because your kids are with the babysitter or because you are trying to arrange other things, but do not make all of your breaks be about the phone. Some questions we're going to ask or might ask. For sure, tell me about yourself. Tell me about X previous research experience. Things like, what do you enjoy most about doing research? What don't you enjoy about doing research? Don't say I love it all, because really, it's not that believable. We all have things we love about our work. We have things we don't love. We're not looking for you to be like irrationally positive and completely Pollyanna about how hard graduate school and careers in science are. We're looking for you to be mature and reflective about it. You will likely get the question, how has the pandemic influenced your research experience? Be honest without being too negative. Questions about the future. What types of scientific problems do you hope to work on? What approaches would you like to apply? What are areas you haven't learned about that you think you need to learn about? Why do you think you're ready for graduate school? And then a really important one, what interested you in our program? If you are talking to someone in a program where you have to connect with mentors in advance and someone has to agree to take you, it would be, what interested you in my group? And then if you have some blemish, why did you do so poorly in? Somebody might, if you changed labs, notice that and say, why did you change labs during your postbac? These are all things you can practice in advance. Lots more questions, some around career goals. What are your strengths? What about weaknesses or gaps? We are not looking for you to say something like, I work really hard. That's my weakness. Sometimes I work too hard. That's not a weakness. That's somebody pretending to answer a question without answering it. We all have come easies and come hards. Share a little bit of what you do perceive as gaps. If you feel really bad about that, you can share what you've done to work on it. I get very, very nervous during presentations. That's why I've taken every opportunity to present in my lab, in my branch at Postback Poster Day. You don't need to pretend you don't have weaknesses. What do you think will be hard about graduate school is one of my favorite questions, and I know several other people who ask it as well, because it gives us a sense of whether you are realistic or not. There's some people who will probe, you say you want to be a professor. Are you aware of how difficult academic careers are? Sometimes PIs can be very negative about this, especially now everyone is stressed. And so you might get some, are you crazy? Do you really want to do this? And then there might be some personal questions. How do you relax? What have you read recently? What have you done during the pandemic, hobby-wise? Or what have you done during the pandemic to take care of yourself? Another thing that you might be asked, is there anything you wish I had asked you? That is your chance to point out something important. Maybe you changed labs and it was a really difficult situation and you learned a tremendous amount of resilience through it, and somebody doesn't ask, and you might say, well, actually, I'd like to point out that I had to change labs at NIH, and it was due to some really serious issues in my first group, and I learned a lot about assertiveness and stress management and using resources during that process. So there, you might have something you wish that they had asked. There is a type of question called behavioral questions that are not used as much in graduate interviews, but I see a slow gradual increase. And these are when we ask about prior behavior because it's a good indication of future behavior. So for example, describe a time when you had difficulty working with a supervisor or coworker. How did you handle it? We are looking for you to tell a story. All right, tell me about a time you failed to meet a deadline. What did you learn? Give me an example of a conflict in your group. How did you handle it? Right? These are things that we ask you to reflect on what happened in the past so that we can get a sense of how you handled things. In terms of preparing for behavioral questions, you want to think about the important behaviors that we need to see in graduate students, the ability to be flexible, the ability to multitask, the ability to reach out and seek support when we need it, the ability to manage stress and increase resilience. Think about times when you've done that. Focus on what happened in those situations. Think about what positive behaviors you did. I reached out for advice. I took time before I went to talk to them because I could tell everyone was heated. I didn't send an email I wanted to send because I realized it wouldn't help. So focus on what you did that was helpful. You might reflect a moment on what you did that was unhelpful, right? Because then you can show, I learned from this not to act in haste, or I learned from this that it's good to go to my PI and bring up issues, right? So think about what worked and what didn't work. Those of you doing the Resilient Scientist series now, or I've done it in the past, a lot of journal prompts are think about a time when this went well, think about a time when this didn't go well. We're going to do feedback tomorrow, right? And the last prompt is think about a time you handled hard feedback really well. What happened? Think about a time you didn't handle it so well. What happened? So you can use those kinds of journaling exercises to help here. There is an approach, situation, action, result, or SAR, which you have to practice. It doesn't come naturally to most of us. And many of you haven't had a chance to interview lately. So I think it's important to practice. If you are at NIH, we will be holding mock interview groups. We won't focus the entire time on behavioral questions, but we'll make sure you have a chance to practice one or two of them. The OITE career counselors are available to practice with you. If you are outside NIH, there are some resources online on our YouTube channel for answering behavioral questions. You can visit your career center at your university as well. So you're going to get questions, but you want to be able to ask questions as well. And here are the kinds of questions that you might consider asking. What kinds of positions do your graduate students take? What are the qualities you see in students that succeed here? An important one, how has the pandemic changed your graduate program? How does the mentor selection work? How do members of the graduate community support each other? If you just say, is this a supportive community? Someone can say yes, but you don't have any details, and maybe there really isn't that much. But if you say, how do members support each other? They have to give examples. You might want to ask a PI, do you anticipate taking students in the coming year? But appreciate just because they say yes now doesn't mean they are, right? Things change. What types of career development workshops are offered? What types of wellness workshops are offered? What types of training in diversity and inclusion is offered? Is there mentor training to both mentors and mentees? Right? Some questions about details of matching. What happens if the mentor I want to work with does not have funding? Maybe you can't go there, so you need to know that. Things about students publishing, students going to meetings, who supports students. You can ask details about pay, right? Is it enough to live here, right? All kinds of things. And here are lots more of them. I want to highlight what happens if a student needs to change groups. We all know that this happens. We all know that there are very difficult research environments out there. I call them tour mentoring environments. In the last part of the Resilience series, which is the lecture webinar will be 2 weeks from tomorrow, I'll talk about mentoring. I just can't stress enough. One of the most important protective factors for student mental health and well-being is a supportive mentor who encourages you to take time away, who encourages you to join groups, who nurtures you, who listens to you. And so you want to know, you want to hopefully find that group, right? But if it doesn't work out, how are you supported, right? You want to ask, I love this one. What do you like best about the program? Well, that's easy. But what do you think needs to be improved? It requires people to be honest. And if everyone says nothing, they're bullshitting, right? I am very proud of a lot of things we do at NIH for our trainees, but a lot of things need to be improved. Everyone should be able to reflect on what needs to be improved. You want to consider some questions that you will only ask administrators or faculty or students, but some questions that you ask to all three groups to see what they say. How supportive, how do students and faculty support each other here? You'd love to hear what PIs say. You'd love to hear what students say, right? So it's really a good idea to ask the same question of different groups. A few things to avoid. Do not badmouth other schools or programs. I still remember so vividly a time when I was still at Chapel Hill that a student came and she spent the entire time talking about another school and how wonderful it was, and a lot of time bad mouthing a different school. And we were turned off by both of those. And although the student had outstanding credentials, we didn't make an offer. So don't badmouth other schools. Don't talk too much about another school and how much you loved it. You are there in the moment at that school. Remember to thank each interviewer. You do not need to send handwritten cards. You can send emails if you want. You can thank people in the moment as well. Do not skip social events, even if they are on Zoom and you say, how lame, how can you have dinner on Zoom? Nobody has figured out how to have my Chipotle burrito come out of the camera. Still go. Do not check email and answer your phone while in Zoom activities or in real-time activities unless you have an emergency, and I suggest you close all notifications so you're not distracted. And be on time. You want to avoid arriving late for interviews and activities. Sometimes it is not your fault, right? Your flight was delayed, or the shuttle bus from the hotel to school was delayed, or your internet flickered and you had trouble getting on. When that's the case, take a deep breath. When you get there, say, I'm sorry, the bus was late, or I'm sorry, I had some technology challenges. If you can text people to let them know, that's a great way to balance being late. right? But move on. After the interview, you can send emails or cards to thank the program directors, program administrators. If you had a student host, I do not think you have to send handwritten cards. Feel free to if that makes you feel good. Any offers that you get, you should acknowledge with a prompt thank you and find out when the program needs a firm commitment. I think it's important to not commit before you're ready, and important in this particular time and place that we're in to ask about potential campus visits. If everything was virtual, you might want a chance to visit later, and hopefully the pandemic will continue to move in the direction that we hope, and it will be safer and safer to travel. So a few near final thoughts. Plan your interview, all of your interviews wisely to minimize stress and distraction. Make sure you have a standard set of questions in advance. Be self-confident, but do not be egotistical. Do not dominate the discussion. Do not try so hard to impress that you turn people off. You're being interviewed even when you are not in formal interviews. When you are talking to the administrator about technical issues, or when you are planning your your trip or issues to prepare for the interview, when you are walking across campus with someone, all of those things are a part of the interview, even though they don't feel like it. Be careful of ends of one person loving it or one person hating it. Don't be overly swayed. You are looking for a consensus, knowing that opinions will vary, but ends of one, I would never come here. Those reflect somebody's unhappiness. If a lot of people say, in hindsight, I wish I had chosen another program, that's something different. Ask yourself if you would fit in well with current grad students and other interviewees. Even virtually, students said they got a chance to get to know some of the other people who interviewed. Sometimes they exchange contact information and talk afterward. That's a perfectly good thing to do. And then sit right when you're done and take notes, because your memory will fade. Most important final thought is it's a stressful and emotional process. You are doing this in a stressful and emotional time. So many things have happened to all of you in the last 20 months. Really scary things, really difficult things, life-changing things. We are in a time of great flux in our country and in the world. So let's acknowledge that. Take good care of yourself, right? From physical well-being to mental well-being, to connecting with what spiritually makes you feel good, with your emotional health and well-being. Take good care of yourself. In the OITE, we really believe in you. We're here. This is one of our biggest joys, to get to work with postbacks preparing to leave. We hate to say goodbye, but on the other hand, we're supposed to say goodbye. Those of you outside NIH, find support on your campus, but the honest truth is, if you can't find support on your campus and you need to talk, just send me an email. You probably have to send me 2 emails. I don't answer everything right away. We're happy to help if need be. There are some videos online that I really recommend on our YouTube channel, and I hope that you take a look. So with that, I realize there's a question here. Is it normal for schools to pay for your flight and lodging? I can't believe I forgot to say that. I always talk about that. I think because I'm so focused on virtual, I didn't. It is very much the norm for schools to provide support. It can be that they purchase your ticket and they pay for 2 nights in a hotel. It can be that they say to you, we will give you $500 towards expenses. Each school does it differently, but most schools offer resources. That is not the case in every type of graduate program, but in many programs in the biomedical sciences, it is. Is it appropriate to ask about student strikes and unionization? If that has been in the news about that school and you are interested in knowing about that, it is completely appropriate to ask that. How long is the average interview session? It can be 30 minutes if it's one-on-one. It could be an hour if it's you, or 45 minutes if it's you and a group of people. Usually about between 30 and 45 minutes. Should we take notes during the interview? Should we wait until after and write everything down? I think that's really up to you. I think it's very hard to listen and write simultaneously, and I don't think it is that helpful to take notes on everything. So I generally recommend not taking notes because you don't need every detail. And then when you have a break, you can jot down some big things, or in the evening, some big things. But if taking notes helps you in some way, it is absolutely fine. What would you recommend saying when someone asks, tell me about yourself? I would recommend starting with what you do, what you're currently doing. Well, I'm currently postbac at NIH. I work in a lab exploring telomerase activity in healthy human aging cells, fill in the blanks, whatever. I use these techniques, and that's where I suggest starting. Some people like to talk about where they grew up, things like that. I don't think that's exactly what people in graduate school are looking for. And so I really encourage you to focus on, here's what I am doing now, professionally relevant to graduate school. If you botch a question, how can you recover? So first of all, I would say sometimes we're not the best judge of botch or not. Some questions are hard and nobody expects a really great answer. But if you're not happy with an answer, take a deep breath and say, you might just let it go because the next question came and you have a chance to shine there, right? You might feel that it's really important to address. So you might say, I'm afraid I didn't do as well as I had hoped. Could I please expand on my answer? I think that you need to view the interview as highs and lows. There's going to be shining moments and less than shining moments and very much not shining moments. We hope you don't have a lot of those, right? But it's going to be hard to feel great about the whole thing, right? There's going to be moments where you think, oh, I didn't answer that very, very well. I get off every webinar and I go, ouch, I missed something I wanted to say. Right? That's human, right? We can't do all this perfectly. There's no such thing as perfection. Take a deep breath and move on. Should you take it upon yourself to address a weakness in your application? I think that sometimes what you view as a weakness is not viewed as a weakness by others. If you have 1 or 2 grades that aren't good and they don't bring it up, I would not take it upon myself to mention it, okay? What percentage of students that are interviewed typically get into a program on average? I would say it depends. One really key thing to keep in mind is that virtual allows us to interview more people. So I think the opportunity to get interviews expands, but because more people are interviewed, the rate of acceptance has decreased. Depends on the program. And so I don't want to give a number, but I would say it can be as high as 70 to 80% and as low as 10%. Okay. And I think it's not usually 10%. It's probably more like 25 to 80. I have heard in clinical psychology interviews, sometimes professors will ask about other schools you're applying to. How would you recommend handling this gracefully? That was asked by multiple people about non-psychology clinical psych graduate programs. It is true that often schools will say, where do we fall in your list, or where else did you apply? You know, while I understand that that can feel really threatening and negative, the honest truth is, to me, if you handle this in a very matter-of-fact way without oversharing, I think that this can be a good thing for you, right? Because it shows how thoughtful you were in applying. So you can say something like, I chose a variety of schools, including X, Y, and Z, because all of them have outstanding research programs in autism. If somebody says, where do we rank in your list? I mean, I think I would say that's a really ludicrous question because you're not done interviewing yet. So how the hell could you know? I think I would say something like, I'm keeping an open mind and going to every interview with the hope of learning the most I can about the school. I'm interested in this program because fill in the blanks, and I'm really glad to be there. If somebody says, well, really, are we at the top? Answer honestly. You don't want to say, no, you're my safety school at the bottom. I wouldn't answer that honestly. I might say something like, yes, I am very interested. You are in my top list. I might say something like, I have some questions about geographical location. I am applying together with a spouse or partner, so that will influence things. You have a whole lot of options there. As we await interview decisions, there are worries about not receiving offers or receiving conflicting interview dates. So let me talk first about the conflicting interview dates. If you have an interview already accepted at one school and another school interviews and says, can you come on X date? The answer is, I'm sorry, I've already accepted an interview. Is there another option? My hope is they say yes, and then you're in good shape. If they say no, this is the only interview date we offer, then you are faced with the unenviable task of evaluating what you're going to do. And I have watched postbacks choose to back out because the school that they agreed to was way at the bottom of the list, and the school that offered and wasn't flexible was towards the top. You have to take care of yourself. So you have to do that respectfully. You don't want to just be cavalier about it or not suddenly start ghosting a program. But it is okay for you to prioritize. Now, I think if there are a few schools that you are totally jazzed about that are high on your list, especially if you are applying together with a spouse or partner where you really have to land in the same places, I encourage you, for either reason, you're totally jazzed or there's this sort of have to part of this, check on the calendar for those schools and save those dates. If you are invited by another school, you email that more preferred school and you say, I'm just reaching out because you are high on my priority list. I have another invitation and I don't want to take it until I get feedback from you. Now, a school might say, you're not high on our list, move forward. Or a school might say, oh, thank you, please hold that date. So you want to be transparent and open, but in a respectful way. I get a lot of last minute emails about that from someone wanting to practice how to say that. We're here to support you through those. Now, if you go on interviews and you haven't received offers yet, appreciate that not all programs make decisions right away. So they should tell you something about what's next. A good school will say, I want to let you all know, we're going to do 3 interviews. So you won't hear from us till the end of the month. A school might say, we'll be getting in touch with you shortly after. And if you want an update, you can send an email for an update. So I hope that answers all of that question. Let me see. Does the school typically give you an agenda ahead of time? Yes, they should give you an agenda ahead of the time. I think most of us aspire to do that several days ahead so that you can prepare for the faculty that you're going to be meeting with, clinical psych and computer science, where you're interviewing specifically with people who have already expressed an interest in taking you. Obviously, you might have more than a few days notice there, but you should get an agenda in advance. Unfortunately, it gets chaotic. The pandemic has made it hard on schools, right? Lots of administrators have kids, and there's lots of issues with taking care of kids during the pandemic. So it might be delayed a little bit. Show some grace and some patience. If you get it very last minute, then obviously you can't read lots of papers. And you could be clear about that. You could say to a PI, I didn't realize I didn't get my schedule until last night. I had a brief chance to look at your research online. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. In our short introduction, should we mention why we applied to certain programs and connect it to our interests? You can, that is not required. But if you want, to say, here's who I am, here's what I do. I am especially excited about this program because of your cancer center or because of your industry internship. Sure. It doesn't have to be there, but it could be there. Is it appropriate to mention manuscripts written but not published? It is absolutely appropriate to say, I worked on a manuscript that's currently under review. That should be on your resume, hopefully, and you do want to talk about that. How appropriate it is to have a notebook with a list of questions and take notes during one-on-one meetings. I think I addressed the issue of taking notes. It is fine to have a notebook and jot down some things, but do not get too distracted by that. Does the timing of the interview factor into the decision on acceptance? If I schedule an interview later in the month, will this be understood of a lack of interest? No, it will be understood as somebody who has multiple interviews. I used to think there was some advantage to going early versus late. We've looked at that a little bit in graduate admissions. The honest truth is everybody wants to recruit the best people. Okay, so you go when you can go. What does look bad about your lack of interest is if you're not responsive, if you drag your feet, if you change your mind a lot. As I am looking to apply to master's programs that focus on industry, how much time should I be expected to talk about my research at NIH? Or should I spend more time focusing on my experience that relates to industry? I think you should expect to do both. And I think that people will ask different things about what you're learning from your time at NIH versus what you learned from your time in industry. You should be ready to do both. Any suggestions for folks who have an especially hard time conversing? I have panic attacks regularly and shut down and come across as unenthusiastic. I want to thank you for being courageous in asking that. So I think that this is an incredible opportunity for some people, and it is a really difficult thing for others. And you need to be who you are, and you can't put pressure on yourself to suddenly snap your fingers and be something else. I really encourage you to talk with a counselor about that now, starting in advance, to do a little bit of extra practice, to really double down on your wellness practice, and to also be open with appropriate boundaries. So you might talk to the administrator beforehand and say, I want to be honest that interviews can be really challenging for me. If you have any tips for success, I would appreciate it. You might choose not to do that. Then you will, do your best in the moment. Appreciate that you are who you are. Make the most of the times that you share. You have to let go of a little bit of the stress about it. If you really get stressed in the moment, there was the question about what do we do if we really get caught and aren't happy with how we answer. You could email someone afterward and reach out and offer to talk and explain. I think there are a number of strategies for dealing with that. A lot of them need to be discussed with experts. Do you have advice to those reapplying to some of the same programs that you applied to last year? I would just reaffirm your interest and not worry about it very, very much. Schools take people the second and third time around. Sometimes, especially last year, numbers were down in terms of how many people we could accept, and numbers were up in terms of applications and interviews. And so I would just hold your head up and show your persistence. You also might want to point out what was different, right? You might have done something to strengthen your application. You want to point that out. I understand that so much of interviewing is situation dependent in the relationship we develop with the committee member, but is light humor and answering less serious questions about the program all right? So some people use humor very effectively. Remember that what's funny to you may not be funny to someone else. So if you feel that you use humor effectively, feel free to be you. Strengths overused become liabilities. I would not overdo it, and I would be very cautious that your humor is really sort of generic, accessible, and acceptable to everyone type of humor. How would you answer a diversity question, and are they common? I think that we are all becoming aware that we jointly share the responsibility for building welcoming and inclusive work environments. So you might get a question about, tell me about how you've contributed in the past to enhancing diversity in your community. You could talk about trainings that you've taken. You can talk about volunteer activities that you've done. You can talk about how you've worked to become an ally to communities that you're not a part of. If you are a part of an underrepresented community, you can share your experiences, and you might want to then step out and say, but I appreciate there are other elements and other dimensions of diversity. Here's how I've learned about those. Here's how I've worked to be an ally. Where or in which part of the interview do you think it's appropriate to mention that your spouse or significant other is an important factor in choosing a graduate school? So, if somebody says, what are the things that are really weighing on you? It is 100% appropriate to say, I am really hoping that my spouse and I can land in the same city or land at the same university. It is totally appropriate. You might decide you don't want to share that. And so then you don't have to mention it. The reason people don't share it is they think when we hear that, we're going to get scared away. Oh, let's not make an offer to them, because if their spouse doesn't or significant other doesn't get an offer, they're not going to say yes. The honest truth is we don't do that very much. What we do actually is think, what can we do to help? We want to pick the best people. So with appropriate boundaries, share what's relevant to you. If your dream school gives you an offer before you attend other school interviews, is it appropriate to back out? I personally think that it's a very bad idea to let a dream school drive, because dream schools can turn into nightmare schools really quickly. I personally would go on other interviews, maybe not 10 other interviews, but you shouldn't be applying to that many schools. So I personally would not back out. I've mentored lots of postbacks my own who've worked in my lab, but also others that I've gotten to know really well at NIH, who have told me they were certain they were going to land in X school. And after interviewing, they went to another school with great enthusiasm and excitement. So I would be really, really cautious. Here's a question: when it comes to body language during the interview itself, for those on the autism spectrum, should we try more to use our genuine body language or try to present in the more socially accepted way? And again, I think that is a really important and courageous question. And I thank you for asking. I think that it is very hard. It takes a lot of energy to not be yourself. On the other hand, we want others to respond to us effectively. And so I would say you shouldn't try to be someone else. You also should look in advance at what you do that might be difficult for others. Discuss it with a counselor, practice, do your best, and be who you are to some degree, but maybe your very best who you are. I think that's the same about the question about anxiety. We are who we are, but we do have our best self and our less than best self and our really struggling self. A big part of that, I think, is to fully embrace who we are and talk about it. One of the things I was talking about today in terms of the resilience series was holding a session at some point for students who are neurodiverse to talk a little bit about social cues and receiving feedback and having difficult conversations, because a lot of self-awareness and awareness of others comes in a different way to neurodiverse students. And I think it's the same around social anxiety and really deep introversion. And so I will talk with the staff and the wellness advisors, and we will acknowledge that that's a gap in what we've offered and try to do something about it very quickly. How should we handle impromptu interviews with PIs of interest if we email them and let them know of our interest in their lab, and then we suddenly have a chance to meet with them? I personally don't support people doing a whole lot of that. If you're in a program that allows you to do rotations and meet people, I think there's plenty of time. And a lot of times we put a lot of energy into that, and then those people don't have openings, or we learn that they're absent mentors or not the very best of mentors, or there's things about their group we don't like. I don't really think it's that important of an issue, but if it excites you and you do it and you have a chance to talk to somebody in an impromptu way, lean in and enjoy it, right? You can say, I'm really interested in your work because of, and I thank you for talking with me, and they'll take it from there. Ask some questions, just lean in and enjoy. It's like doing some improv, right? And some of you might not want to do that. So that's okay. You don't have to reach out to people. If the school says you have to reach out to people and, arrange to talk with 3 of them, then do that. And that's not quite so improv then. So hopefully that helps. It looks like I have cleared everything. So, and I think I am ending on time, 4 minutes late. That's not too bad. All right. So this is really the beginning of a wonderful journey that is stressful, that can be really uncomfortable. I note that for some of you, there are lots of added challenges, and we are here to be as supportive as we can be and to offer as much help as we can. So please reach out. Everyone stay safe and healthy. We're entering the Thanksgiving season, where here in the US, we focus on things that we are grateful for. I hope that all of you have many things to be grateful for as we move forward. And I would like to say that I am grateful every day to get up and work with so many talented students. So take good care, and we will be in touch with trainees later to talk about mock interviews and such. Take good care. Bye-bye.